This movie made me realize again what a great movie is. It shattered all those little things that I've grown to automatically look for in a film in my attempt to, critique and to analyze. And it left me with just a simple truth. This is art. This moved me, this excited me, this challenged me. This is a good movie. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the barn. Today, we are discussing the film Source Code. And in regard to Source Code, I'd forgotten that great films like these are those that simply tell a story and tell it well. There doesn't have to be, a very clear central theme shoved in your face and connecting everything in the story under like a single one description word. A film doesn't have to be about just the one topic. So many movies, even great ones, seem to be coming from an angle of all the characters saying and doing things, all the events just transpiring, and the editing and the story structure, everything about the movie being shaped in order to adhere to a core message that the film wants to showcase. For example, I've already discussed on this channel the centrality of the theme vengeance versus hope in The Batman and how just everything in that film ties to its theme in some way. I think that science fiction and fantasy as well, but obviously we're talking about science fiction today, from what I've seen, might just be the most adept genre of storytelling to turn this pattern on its head and tell an engaging narrative that makes you feel things and ultimately gets you thinking about certain themes even when you can't even place why. The thoughts stemming from those wild situations that the film places its characters in. Science fiction, through interesting premises, pulls us back from everyday life and transports us beyond the natural. And from that vantage point, we can observe and mull over the intricacies and oddities of the human condition. For example, Arrival does this by introducing an almost frightening and mind bending alien race to the Earth, and through a scientist's struggle to understand why they have come, brings from its story a meditation on the nature and the power of language. Blade Runner muses about what it means to be human by setting up a world of replicants and then blurring the lines between them and human beings. And yet, in the film, this is rather an underlying thing for the most part, only truly becoming explicit by the end. And as most of the film is just a futuristic noir detective story. Source Code is another of these films that doesn't wear its themes on its sleeve, as it were. Yet, as the strange events unfold, as we experience this story through the eyes of Coulter Stevens, one can't help but reflect on life and death, time, fate, causality, and even love. These thoughts don't come because the characters talk at length about these topics, but because these thoughts and questions are wrapped up in the intrigue and excitement of this science fiction thriller, and they bolster the impact that this film has. It's not just a simple time loop movie. I've seen many of those, and to be fair, I love all of them. The goofy ones, the sappy ones, and even the ones that are only there for those unique action possibilities that time loop movies give. But Source Code sets itself apart almost immediately by throwing us into the confusion of our protagonist immediately, once the opening credits have rolled. Little details whiz by in an expedited tread through the common time loop, trope of unique occurrences that will be amusing the more they happen and the more our hero comes to expect them in the clockwork-like repetition he must go through. With no information given and such strange things as Coulter's reflection not matching his face, Already the tension of mystery mounts until the train explodes. And once again, source code deviates from the common time loop convention and transports Coulter to an odd pod like room where he is strapped in a uniform. Even with a cursory glance at the first two events of the film, we can see showcased the masterful buildup of tension and mystery that this film balances, even as more information is revealed. And this is so important. Little tidbits still remain to keep the audience off balance. The mystery of the frost in his pod. Why are there so many shots of just the camera that is pointed at Captain Goodwin? At the risk of spoiling too much, I won't get any more specific, but let it be said, and suffice it to say, that there is always another twist just around the corner, sometimes small, it's sometimes just very minuscule, but nonetheless, it is sufficiently built up, and it becomes shocking and effective. Paramount to any time loop film is pacing. It's absolutely incredibly important. If the pacing isn't correct, then the film just simply won't work. In this film, everything from an editing perspective is just done masterfully. For example, the frantic panic of time running out is indicated by the 2 consecutive runs done by Coulter that are only shown in very small flashes, and then ending with a rather horrific slow motion image of Christina being blown up in the explosion, also telling us what Coulter is fixating on the most in those very quick runs that he does. Coulter's not necessarily the best man for this job, as is often the case in these films, but there is no time for him to spend run upon run, increasing skills and predicting moves of the people on the train. And I think this adds another element of tension, as he often runs amok, sometimes using his precious 8-minute window completely uselessly. And I love that. Direction and performances, cinematography, and even music score are just all top notch. I feel like that just goes without saying. But since it's Duncan Jones, I have to just give an extra word on direction. One can see why this story was a great choice for him to direct. It bears a similarity to his first film, Moon, in that it presents an essentially solitary central character thrown into a huge twist of a situation that proves a psychological battle for his sense of self. I felt that the scenes in the pod were some of the most impactful because not only were those scenes home to the biggest twists in the film, but also the sense of entrapment for Coulter and a deflated sense of meaning for his existence, which, as adeptly as he handled it in Moon, Jones does here again. Okay, so there are going to be spoilers from this moment on. I really highly suggest that you go watch this movie, and I also highly suggest you keep watching once you have seen it. When Coulter discovers he is dead, his focus shifts. And even though I suspected he was dead earlier on in the film, the ramifications of this fact I did not anticipate. And that's those tiny little twists that keep the audience on their toes that I was talking about. One of my favorite moments in this film is when the camera finally shows what Goodwin sees on her monitor when Coulter is talking to her. It's merely text from a barely alive brain, transmitted from a man who was resurrected to be essentially a computer. It just hit me really hard, again, with an excellent build-up, how Coulter has been robbed of something in being given his life back. The image of his mutilated body, a torso with wires coming out of the back of his head, drives even further home that in mentally circumventing Coulter's death and refusing to let him die, Dr. Rutledge has done a terrible thing. Yet as Coulter tries to come to grips with the uncertainty of what his life even is, he himself, like the audience of a science fiction film, begins to reflect on life. To think of his father, who he never reconciled with in the real world, of all the people on the train already dead in the real world, and especially of Christina, who he thought he had saved in an early run, only to find out the truth of his situation, that nothing he did actually mattered. All of this culminates in Coulter, unwilling to live a half-life of repetition, devoid of his natural, real self. Only a shadow, living in shadows of memories, asking Captain Goodwin to give him one last run of 8 minutes and then pull the plug on him. He says that it may sound weird, but he wants to save the people on the train. He knows they aren't real, yet he still feels he must do it. And though unspoken, he also wants to see Christina one last time. Going in, Coulter jokes around with Christina, then asks her to coffee, then pacifies some angry passengers, paying a comedian on the train to entertain them for their last minutes, and swiftly immobilizing the bomber, reconciles with his father and returns to Christina, pointing out the moment, everyone laughing at the comedian together, unaware of life ahead. And he asks her, "What would you do if you knew you had less than a minute to live?" And she responds, "I'd make those seconds count." And there is the theme of the film, explicitly stated at the end, wrapping up a tightly told and expertly crafted thrill ride with an emotional, satisfying, and thoughtful ending. The world freezing as the timer hits 0, and the camera panning through the train compartment, showing a precious moment of time, a precious slice of life. The true ending, as the world unfreezes. Surprisingly, another twist even at the end, and life goes on. Coulter seemingly does the impossible and changes the past and visits a place with Christina he had seen in a flash forward beforehand. It leaves some questions, not the least of which is the fate of the consciousness of the man who he essentially took possession of. There's a little bit of Wonder Woman 1984 there, where you don't exactly know what happened to the guy he possessed. But all this brings up thoughts about what this film is saying about reality and fate, relationships, and especially the power of love. But I think I'll ponder this slightly ambiguous ending for myself, and I'll continue to just chew on all the good things that this film has to offer.